Kyle and I talk about at what point it's okay to take someone's labor from them. We talk about masks and are they helpful, aren't they? If you're interested in a full transcript of the episode and how to connect with us, you can go on to SocraticHobbits.com. Thanks for listening. We are Socratic Hobbits.
How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Another beautiful day. We've had a hot week here, man. I don't remember it being quite this hot.
It hits 100 every year.
Does it hit 100 like 3 days in a row, and then it's on the forecast again?
Some years.
Yeah.
I did see that they are giving it a 50-50 chance for La Nina, which is really good for skiing. So we'll see if that comes to fruition.
You don't live near any of these mountains anymore. You still gonna drive over?
Right. I live near mountains with good snow.
You have better snow over there?
Definitely.
Oh.
Not to be a snob, but yes.
Not to be a snob, but I am being a snob. Is it I want to say Rainier. Rainier?
No, Rainier's up by Seattle.
That's
so
right.
Crystal Mountain's right across from Rainier. If you come over and ski the Bitterroots and Selkirks, that's where Schweitzer and Lookout Pass and Silver Mountain are.
Gotcha.
And then if you go south about 4 hours, 3.5, 4 hours, you get to McCall, and you got Brundage and Tamarack.
Are those all what are those heights?
Most of them are just ski areas. They aren't
so I wouldn't be able to come?
Schweitzer is the one that is a resort.
Like, would I be welcome as a snowboarder, or no, not really?
Oh, by ski area, I just mean it doesn't have a full-scale lodge and stuff.
Oh, I see.
No, I think the only places that don't allow snowboarders, last I heard, were Alta and Taos. And both of them were getting pressure to allow snowboarders. But Alta's near Salt Lake, and then Taos is in New Mexico.
Okay. I'm just looking at these notes. You changed some of them.
I did.
This
added
is
a couple
acceptable.
things.
Yeah. So you're week 4 at your new job?
Yeah, I believe that's right. I haven't really been counting. I've been more just trying to absorb everything. Today we had a meeting where I finally realized that I'm not the only one who doesn't know everything that's going on.
Yeah.
Because we had a conversation about how there have been discussions about how to organize work on this team for the last couple of years.
Oh.
And it's just been a lot of experimentation, which actually fits in pretty well with the thing I wanted to talk about in book club from the book I've been reading. But we can go over what you've been reading, The Two Towers, first, or I don't know if there are any other things.
Two Towers. It's now essentially retelling the story from Frodo's point of view. Got through the end of, it's been a week or so or two since I was looking at the with Saruman and everything. But they're Orthanc and Helm's Deep. There we go. That was what I was having a hard time remembering. But yeah. So it's I was pretty struck by how quickly Gollum changed in going from hating Frodo and Sam Gamgee, and it seems like they were just arguing about whether they should kill him or not, and then Frodo insisted, based on his conversation with
Gandalf.
Yep.
In Moria.
That he should spare him. Yeah, so that was just imagined it being a little bit longer of a process, but it wasn't. It was in a page.
Now, where are Frodo and Sam at right now? So you're with Frodo and Sam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they haven't gotten anywhere very interesting yet. I mean, if I was looking at a map, I might be able to, like, they're not into...
Have they made it to the Dead Marshes yet?
I think they're either past that or just near the end of that, I think. I get that impression.
Okay.
You can spoil it for me. What's after that?
The Black Gate.
No, they're not there yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think that really spoils anything, but that's in the movie. Yeah, that's always been a slow part of the book for me. Although, I shouldn't say always, because the most recent time I went through it, I think I started to see more of the character appreciate more of the character development aspects in there and focus on that rather than getting bogged down in the slow movement of time, which When I was younger, that definitely,
Boring.
yes, get me to the battles.
Yeah. Well, and then now we've talked about how Tolkien doesn't even really like writing about battles.
Right.
There are still some in there, but.
Well, thanks for the update.
Yep, that's where we're at. We'll at the very least we'll run this podcast through the end of The Lord of the Rings.
Sounds good. Yeah. So have you been pretty full up the last couple weeks?
Full?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been working. Just kind of the typical. We're starting closeout. You and I had talked about that a little bit. So for project management with any project, you kind of have at least 3 phases, maybe more. You have startup where you're getting submittals in throughout the whole project, and even before the project, you'll have requests for information where you ask the owners and architects different as problems come up, and then most of the middle, like you're basically still getting submittals. You'll have new products, you'll have substitutions and different things. But one of the important pieces at the end is like owner manuals and an owner's manual for everything that you installed.
Right. Yeah.
It ends up being a several thousand page document.
Who writes that?
So every subcontractor, every manufacturer will have an O&M manual for their specific product, but it's the project engineer who puts all those together.
Okay, so it's your job to compile everything. And
create a table of contents and distribute it and make sure it kind of makes sense.
Okay.
I mean, it's not like I'm writing a narrative, so I'll have created a 2,000 or 3,000 page. I mean, I don't know, it might not be that much, but a significant document without having read most of it.
Right.
Because that would just be a lot.
Sounds like us in our transcripts.
Yeah, since we don't read all of those completely.
Right.
We'll see if we get.
Well, since I kind of like throw stuff together and then
I edit it.
You give it a once over with the docs edit. Yeah.
Yeah, grammar check. Well, I don't know that. I mean, you can't even really get to it from our website very easily. I mean, if you look for it, you can. There's not that many pages, but. So there's a few things on feedback. 1, you hate Hello Internet, so I'll never bring them up again.
Yes.
And then 2, you're tired of chit-chatting with me. Is that a...
Hate is the right word. I hate Hello Internet, and I hate chit-chat.
Oh, sorry. Loathe. Is that better?
We could go with despise.
Despise, disdain. Okay, so okay. So a little more realistically.
This isn't fair because the people can't see me like smiling.
Yeah, you're smirking.
In
for
humor.
Everybody. That's all right. They can tell. So you listened to an episode of.
I listened to a couple.
One of my favorite. Well, you listened to a couple. Okay.
Yeah.
And you were not. It wasn't a big deal to you. You were like, this is almost a waste of my time.
Yeah, and then I listened to another podcast which you recommended, The Knowledge Project, and I have been eating that up.
No. I want to talk about Hello Internet. This is what got me interested in podcasting at all. Their episode 10 is called Two Dudes Talking, and it's basically what we're doing, although we, I think, have a slightly more focus than them, because they literally will just talk about whatever, and
right.
Because they're enjoyable to listen to for me, there is actual helpful. It's much more like sitting and having a coffee with someone and learning how they approach problems and learning. I don't know that you could, after listening to an episode or two, gain a lot of value, but by listening to 20 episodes, you get a different kind of outlook, and they are just entertaining, and they do that. They're both YouTube. They both earn their living that way, so they're used to that. But I guess maybe the reason that you wanted to switch to the Knowledge Product so quickly is because you don't have much to talk about the Hello Internet podcast, because it was just not very interesting to you. Is that?
I think it was more as you're describing how you approach Hello Internet. I was thinking of the Knowledge Project episodes I've listened to, and it's funny. I can't remember the Farnham Street blog writer's name, but he was Shane Parrish. So Shane was interviewing, for example, Jason Calacanis, who was discussing how he approaches life having spent time learning to play poker and learning to invest in startups, and the way he sees similar models in how to interact or engage with the world in making decisions based off of statistics and reading people in both poker and in investing in early stage startups. And that sort of learning about how someone understands the world is what's really fascinating to me.
Why is that?
I guess I'd have to say I find it to be, and this is going to be really funny considering we're two dudes talking.
Mm-hmm.
I find it more interesting personally, and hopefully this doesn't scare off all the many listeners to our podcast, but I find it more interesting to hear the story of someone who either has been or is at the top of their field, as opposed to hearing the back and forth between
friends,
people who are friends. Yeah. And then the other thing that I enjoy is the ADD bit of getting to hear a new person's perspective each episode. So as opposed to getting the same perspective each episode, if I listen to an episode that interviews people, I feel like I get exposed to more models of thought, which is at some level just entertaining for me.
Mm-hmm.
And
like
then
infotainment.
Yeah, exactly. But at another level, I enjoy systematic thinking, or I like to think I enjoy systematic thinking.
Oh, that's a nice thought.
And so I enjoy I just listened to Tim Ferriss interview Howard Marks, and now I'm going to listen to Shane Parrish interview Jason Calacanis, and then maybe listen to Pat Flynn interview Michael Hyatt, and look at the different commonalities or common threads that can be woven together from how those three different people being interviewed look at the world, and then also looking at the common threads in how the interviewers ask questions and how that works with the people they're interviewing.
Yeah, so I can see that as being entertaining, but I don't know that it's particularly helpful.
Okay.
And here's why. You don't see, so there's two podcasts that I listen to. The one, Hello Internet, we've already mentioned, and then also Cortex, which also has CGP Gray's in both of these. But when you don't have recurring guests, or you constantly have new guests, I actually don't know that Tim Ferriss doesn't have recurring guests. He very well may. But you don't really see the follow through. You kind of see this, you said you like to see people who are at the top of their game. Well, that changes all of the time. And you don't, so we read Atomic Habits, and you don't see the result of that effective thinking. It's almost like, well, you're just looking for roads that are above a certain elevation and not what the road before or after looks like. Whereas, not that I know Brady Heron very well, but I would say I know him better than any of the other people who I see on these other podcasts too. It's just like a highlight. It's almost like Facebook or social media, where you see just the highlights, and it looks like they have a wonderful life, but you don't know.
That's really okay.
Yeah. You go.
That's really interesting that you mentioned that, because Jim Collins, when Shane Parrish interviewed him, asked Shane, okay, what are the questions that you never get really good answers to, or that people seem to dodge? And Shane's response to that was, people dodge or aren't very honest about what difficulties they've had in life, or what challenges they've met that they haven't dealt with effectively. And that actually led to a conversation between Shane and Jim, talking about close relationships in their lives that had gone south, and it opened up kind of a door into what you're describing there of how did these people process, or how are they still processing really low points in their lives? These people that we view as high functioning, hyper successful people, they still have tremendous difficulties. They're still impacted by living in a world broken by the fall. So it's, yeah, that just came to my mind when you were talking about how you don't always get to see the road there. And that was something that Shane actually acknowledged in one of his episodes when he was interviewing Jim Collins.
Yeah, well, and it's definitely possible that, you know, I guess what I've described, I don't think is true in all cases. I think that there are sometimes when, you know, if you have a particularly honest, someone basically who isn't posturing, if you have a particularly honest interviewer and interviewee, because it's really easy to avoid the low points, because that's not how we want to kind of, and it makes sense how we don't want to put ourselves out there. We wouldn't want to necessarily show that side. Whereas with a podcast like this, where I think we will have guests, but I do think you and I are going to, I'm hoping to have you as a recurring guest.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. As long as you get that pop filter eventually, that's going to be the difference. No. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to chat about Hello Internet and why it's your least favorite thing to listen to.
Oh, it's definitely not my least favorite thing to listen to.
Oh, yeah.
I think part of it was it seemed to me like there would be a large investment of time in order to start to get the value out of it that you've gotten out of it.
Yeah, definitely.
And so it wasn't something I was interested in investing the time in order to start getting that value out.
Yeah, you don't have time like that. And then you're also tired of talking.
It's not that I don't have time for it. It's that I haven't decided to allocate the time that way.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you don't have time for anything you don't want to make time for. There's some real wisdom.
That actually gets into a conversation my wife and I were having about, this is sort of a funny concept, but we were just discussing, well, first off, let me start off with a question for you. What have you heard or read about the ideal size of an organization for a manager, for one manager? How many people should be under one manager?
I haven't heard,
who are direct reports.
Yeah. I haven't heard a number, but I have an opinion, and I think it's 6.
Okay, that's right in the ballpark of what I've heard. Where have you? What makes you feel like 6 is that right number?
Because you can't have like a give and take relationship with more than 7 in a group. And that goes from the men's group that I was in. We limited groups to that size. One of them was a leader or a facilitator, however you want to phrase it. And, you know, we tried groups that were at 8, and it changed the dynamic enough that it just really wasn't feasible. And, or I mean, it was, but it just, you couldn't have everybody feel like their voice was heard, and then you have less buy-in. It's kind of like if there's somebody starts to drown and there's only one person that can see that drowning person, they feel a certain amount of responsibility. If there's 100 people, each of them feels maybe 100th of that responsibility. And I also, a team of 2 is also, you've just got one direct report. It's like, well, then the manager is a manager and the worker. You can't spend all your time managing one person. Or
okay,
something. Anyway.
So then, did the men's group ever have kind of larger groups that had 2 leaders, and then you kind of divide up? No, it was divided that way intentionally. I was also now that I think about it, I was also in the Boy Scouts, right? And that was the size of a small group as well. 1 leader, 1 assistant leader, and then you had 5 others usually. And there were some times that there were larger groups in that, and it just didn't work out super well. Okay, so you had 6 scouts and 1 leader and 1 assistant leader?
No. So the boys were leading each other, right? The older boys would lead the younger. And so they were all scouts, and there was one leader, one assistant leader, and 5 others.
Okay, so you had a group of 7.
Yeah.
I see.
That wasn't as strict though. Sometimes there would be 6, sometimes there would be, even more. Anyway. So what did you and your wife come up with for a size of group?
Well, what we were talking about was actually how many children is it reasonable to expect that a family could have and still raise those children well. And I mean, I know your church, you've got a lot of larger families than that 7 number. I've been part of several churches that have had larger families than that 7 number. And I was just talking to a friend of mine the other evening about a friend from a larger family who I hadn't talked to in a while, but he's walked away from the faith.
And he was in a family that was larger than 7 or 5 or whatever.
More than 5 kids, yeah. Not many more, but a little bit more. And so that's kind of what got me thinking about this is obviously we can't save our kids, but we can use wisdom to create an environment where that is most conducive to raising them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And so
we can't save our children.
So we can't save our children, but we can create an environment using wisdom that is more conducive to raising them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord than, say, another environment might be. And part of that comes down to what's the ratio of children to parents. And
how much should you try to control that? That's an interesting question that 50 years ago would have been answered. Some people would have said you shouldn't try to control that at all. And some people would have said, control that via abortion or, people say that today.
Right. People will say that. And I think what we do know is that children are a blessing from the Lord. Mm-hmm. We also know that God desires godly offspring.
Mm-hmm. Not from every couple. Right. Sometimes he closes a womb.
True. But in general in Scripture, that's viewed with sadness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's not something that's
desirable,
rejoiced over.
Sure.
I know that I'd use the word desirable. I really think it's maybe healthier or safer to say that's not something that's rejoiced over. Just because of the connotations of those words. I feel more comfortable saying it's not something we rejoice over as opposed to saying this is something we desire, that is something we desire.
What do you mean when you say that? Why do you feel safer with the one phrase over the other?
Right. When we're talking about desires, we're talking about something that we are looking for, and ultimately what we're looking for is growing in sanctification and growing closer to Christ. Mm-hmm. And I mean, in the case of the Apostle Paul, that wasn't necessarily part of his Christian walk, and he had a very strong Christian walk. So to say that he should have desired children is kind of strange. Now to say that if he had a wife and a family, I think it's totally appropriate to say that would have been something for him to rejoice over. But I'm not sure that given his work for the church as a single man, I don't know that saying that he should have had a desire for children is correct.
Okay, fair enough. I feel like we've gotten off of the main thread. We've gone onto a little rabbit trail.
That's true.
Unless that was the point you were trying to make, or you just wanted to explore what's a desirable. It's interesting that you asked a question not about children but about direct reports. Do you feel like your son is working for you at this point? He's only like
No. I was thinking of situations where we have examples of practical wisdom about organizational size that were outside the family, and then looking for ways that could be applied analogously to inside the family.
Okay.
Do you think that that's too far afield in order to be a helpful analogy?
I'll say it feels funny to
Okay.
to why? Why does it feel
Yeah.
funny? Because I was thinking in terms of people who are not at all emotionally enmeshed, right? At a work, you have very little. You kind of have two types of relationships. You have consumer relationships, and you have covenant relationships. Covenant relationships are, the best example is a husband and wife, or rather, the best example that we can see here on earth is of a husband and wife.
There you go.
Yeah, okay. Tricky. So, which is basically something to the effect of, actually, it might even be better. A parent and a child might be better. I don't know. But those are both two very strong covenantal relationships in that we would say, no matter what, you are still my husband or wife or daughter or son or mother or father. And especially from the father or mother to the son or daughter, from the parent to the child, even when the child is acting very unlovable. I've heard, I haven't experienced this, right? But that you love them even more. You care for them even more. You feel even more tender towards them.
You should.
Right. So, and a good example of a consumer relationship is like where you go grocery shopping, right? That you don't have especially now, right? You don't have any kind of relationship with the person you buy your groceries from. If there's a better deal at Safeway, you're going to go to Safeway. If there's a better deal at Winco, you're going to go there. Or if they're having a sale on steaks at Freddy's, guess where you're going to get steaks? It's probably Freddy's. You probably care very little that Winco is where you usually go.
Is that ideal, or would society be better if covenantal relationships were more broadly seen and experienced?
I don't think that's helpful.
Okay.
I think that you and I interact with too many people to have. I think you could make that work in a society where people worked within a couple miles of their house and walked most places and bought groceries most places. That didn't make any sense. Where everything was within a couple of miles of their house. And it was,
right.
Then you could essentially have fewer covenantal relationships, but they would be very strong.
I mean, that's sort of what Mr. Money Mustache on his blog promotes from a secular perspective.
Sure. But in the way that we're set up right now, we don't really have a framework for that.
And again, I'm not asking what is the current state. I'm asking what is the ideal state, assuming there were no restrictions on that.
Well, ideally, we would all work as little as possible, and to the amount that we were, let's say that to the amount of the desire that we have, and we would share freely. I mean, ideally, it would be basically communist. Everybody would share and share alike, right? That's the lion lays down with the lamb. Like,
was God's command to Adam to work as little as possible in the garden?
Yeah, right? No, obviously it wasn't. It wasn't, and that's why I qualified that. Right? Not work as little as possible, but work. I mean, you would.
I guess I missed the qualification.
Yeah. Well, I'll make it so I don't.
Can you delve into your qualification a little bit?
Yeah. So, I guess I shouldn't have said as little as possible. What I should have said was people would work, not overwork, but would work hard, and then share and share alike in the proceeds from that, right? That would be ideal, but I don't think that.
I mean, that's kind of going to a little book on the Christian life, the second chapter in that book. So in the second chapter of that book, Calvin talks. So the little book on the Christian life being, it's a segment from Calvin's Institutes that's been reformatted, remastered for a modern audience and into a little book that's about 5 chapters. And in the second chapter, Calvin's dealing with self-denial. And some of his points in that chapter have to do with working hard, working diligently, working wisely, but recognizing that while we plant the seed, God gives the increase. And so whether God decides to bless our work with fruitfulness or withhold his hand from our work and cause leanness is not our concern. And we shouldn't, if God gives us leanness, we shouldn't then kick against the goads and work harder or become bitter. But to the one who is blessed, he is commanded to share, especially with those of the household of faith, as it says in Galatians, which is what you were describing there. So that's why I went to chapter 2 of the little book of the Christian life.
Sure. Yeah. Why were we talking about covenantal and consumer relationships?
So we were talking about covenantal and consumer relationships because I had asked you about why the family would be different than, say, a working relationship, which also the other place the number of, say, 6 direct reports to a leader comes in a squad in the military is about that size. Mm-hmm. And so you take a SEAL team, and anyone who's listened to Jocko Willing's podcast knows or has heard how close the men on those teams are. That is, in a sense, a covenantal relationship that they have there, even though it is, in another very real sense, a professional relationship, because a lot of those guys are career SEALs. That is their occupation.
Well, and you have every relationship basically starts out as a consumer relationship with a few exceptions. And, what can you give me? If you stop meeting my needs, then I will move on to another place. To a covenantal relationship, like friendships start off as, at some level entertaining or, there are exceptions. But there's you wouldn't start out a friendship with I'll be here no matter what. Like that's kind of one of the hallmarks of a covenantal relationship. No matter what you do, I'm going to be here.
Right. This is making me think of church shopping, since that's what my wife and I are doing in a sense for our family, as much as I hate that term, church shopping.
What would be a better term? Or you haven't thought about it, so that's what you're saying.
It would be some long sentence about looking for a body of believers to be in fellowship with and bless and be blessed by.
It's not near as catchy. Yeah. So you're putting them in an Amazon cart, seeing if you like how they try, and then maybe sending them back.
Well, put them in the Amazon cart, see if they send me a discount, and then,
Yeah. Well, so in addition to, I started talking about this earlier. You don't want to. You feel like we chit-chatted too much. Was this something that was a feedback from you? Was it feedback from?
This was feedback from me.
Okay, I was wondering. Your wife is like, you guys talk too much. She didn't even listen to the podcast, but you guys.
I was actually thinking about the previous podcast, which hasn't been
hasn't dropped
yet. Yeah, hasn't dropped yet. So hopefully people will listen to episode 4 before they listen to episode 5, because otherwise that would be really confusing.
Nah, it'd be fine. Nobody needs to listen in order. So have you read? Okay. So book club. I want to talk about somewhat a new-ish. It was from Shane Parrish. It was from someone he interviewed. They talked about. I wish I could remember the name of it. I'll find it.
Put it in the show notes.
Yeah, but I keep saying that I'm going to put it in the show notes, and very little of those things have ended up in the show notes. I need to figure out a good way to figure that out. And my keyboard is essentially like rolling rocks around in a bag.
Clackety. Yeah.
It's which I like when I'm by myself. It sounds terrible on the podcast, though, so I've edited it out. Let me try again. I've gotten it out of the podcast as much as I can.
Way to get it out.
In any case, so in whoever Shane Parrish is interviewing, they talk about how when they read a book, they don't try to, and they're summarizing, they're taking notes for themselves. They don't try and restate the author's argument. They don't necessarily have a conversation with him with their notes. But what they do is they take specific quotes, and then so they'll take specific quotes, put them in a essentially a database, add tags to it, and then in addition they'll create directives from that book. So instead of saying, when you put your hand on a stove, it can be very hot, and if it were very hot, you would burn yourself, and then you may have to, depending on how hot the stove is, right? You go on and on and on and on. All of that is essentially encoded in the directive, don't touch the stove.
So do they write out the directive, or do they just, okay, so they write down the quote and then essentially do exegesis on the quote?
Yeah. But as I was like reading tactics, instead of trying to write out all of, they were talking about, so in the podcast, talking about efficiency, like talking about like how can you have words that have the most economy, right? And that he posited that having directives encodes the reasons for doing the thing. And if you do the thing, you can learn more about the things that the ideas that precede that directive, if that makes sense.
I mean, this is reminding me of a book I read on how to listen to a sermon that was loaned to me by the pastor at First OPC. And in that book, he kind of gave 4 different components to a sermon. He has the exegesis, the
what comes out of it,
writing down the directive that comes out of the text.
Okay.
You have the doctrine, so how does that fit into the systematic structure of truth that we know about the whole book, the redemptive historical context, which I'm not sure exactly how you would apply that to this, because that's how is Christ evident in this text. So maybe you'd ask, how is the author and his perspective or her perspective evident in that quote? And then you have the application, which is after you've done those first 3 things from that quote, how do you apply it to yourself?
Yeah, and I think that makes sense.
Was that similar to the process he went through? So you had the quote, then you had the directive, and then what did you have after the quote and directive?
Well, so his purpose was somewhat different than what you've described. So you have the quote and the directive, and then you tag those quotes and directives separately with anything that you can think of. You could have a 10-word quote and have 10 different tags. So you could have one that's about, for some of the stuff, the quote that we have in here that we may or may not end up talking about. You have goal seeking, validation, depression. Are you looking at this? So here, I'll read the quote actually, because this.
Yeah. So Dykman's the author of Tiny Habits.
No, he is not. I don't think so.
Okay.
That name doesn't sound familiar. I think that Tiny Habits was written in is after 2010, I think.
Okay, so the quote there is a quote from the author of Tiny Habits quoted.
No, I don't know where you're getting Tiny Habits from. Are you getting it from?
Oh, I thought you were talking about reading Tiny Habits.
No, so I'm going to read this quote, and then we're going to talk about tags that may come from this. So there is evidence that people who set validation-seeking goals are more prone to depressive episodes and self-esteem loss than those who set growth-seeking goals. Validation goals are strivings to prove one's self-worth, competence, and likability through attainment of a goal. In contrast, growth-seeking goals are strivings to learn, grow, and improve. So the directive that would come from that I wrote down from this was set growth-seeking goals. And all of that is essentially encoded in that, in those 5 words or whatever it was.
Right.
So, and then you may tag it self-esteem, depression, goals, goal, learn, grow, improve. You could go through and figure out a bunch of different tags that you may have that very short directive.
Do you also tag the quote?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then if you're thinking about goals, you have this database that you can then type in goals, and you can essentially, let's say you've done this with, been working on this for a year and you have 1,000 things in there. You could pull up easily all of the things that you have done this with, maybe 1,000, let's say 100. And you could have 10 quotes from 10 different books and directives even from those different books and then synthesize them. And it just seemed like a helpful, I read a lot. I think the average is like 2 books a year. So I read more than that. And so it seems like a lot of that kind of, I'm not going to say just goes away, but it gets into the background. Sorry.
It evaporates a little bit.
Actually, I was reading some memory stuff, and roughly, if you haven't looked at something in a year, essentially you remember 20% of the intake.
Was that on Farnham Street?
It might have been.
Yeah, I just read that.
Yeah, you're becoming a Farnham Street junkie, Kyle. You gotta stop.
It's good stuff.
It is good stuff, but you can also, like, if you don't implement it, it's not very helpful. The value of anything is the result that you get from it, right? So I've heard this quote a number of times. The value of the communication is the result that you get from it. If I'm trying to get a hold of, if I'm a salesperson and I'm trying to get a hold of 50 people, that's only valuable if I make a sale that reflects that work. If I reach out to 50 people and I get 0 response, that communication was worthless.
Absolutely. And that's something that in a few of the podcasts I've listened to recently, probably 3 out of the 4 episodes I've listened to in the last week have pointed out the value of taking time for self-reflection instead of continuing to consume. And then, as you pointed out, there's the importance of going beyond self-reflection to actually taking action and implementing what it is you learned, which is the difference between entertainment and learning.
Yeah. So in this last week, in the 4 episodes that you've listened to, were they entertaining or did you learn something?
Well, what I just shared was the primary thing I've learned and started. The way I've started to apply it quite simply is spending less time checking email.
Yeah. I have, it's almost like an anxiety test. Like today, I've been checking my email a lot. Just on my phone. It's my personal email. And it's like I have to be on work for quite a few things. And I think that sentence I just said doesn't make any sense. For work, I am on my phone a lot. I take work phone calls on my personal cell phone. That's just how they have things set up. And it's like, it only takes a second at a time. But it's like I want to check it for that, that every, there's like a specific email I'm waiting for. And it's almost like I've heard it talked about in this way where I'm pulling the slot machine by checking my phone and by having, what do you call it?
Getting that hit of dopamine?
Inconsistent feedback. Yeah. It's like that's the dopamine and you can essentially make rats addicted to levers that like by buttons that way by having inconsistent feedback.
Right. That was in one of the last chapters of Atomic Habits. He talked about how that easy yet surprising feedback is the most addictive for us, and as a result, it's the one thing we have to be most cognizant of and most aware of when we are exposed to it, so that we can use the willpower we have to say no, alter the environment if we can, so that we can make a choice that opens up time for us to reflect and take action and deliver results.
Sure. Do you want to talk about that quote that I read at all? So the difference between validation goals and growth-seeking goals?
Yeah. Where did you get that quote from?
It was I think that was Barking Up the Wrong Tree.
Okay.
Article. I'll put it in the show notes.
I know you will.
Yeah, I'm 90% sure that was that because he will he doesn't post very often. I think it's Eric. I can't say his last name or I don't remember it. Oh, it's Barker. I can't say it. He's just got a funny blog name. But he usually has either very well researched books or actual like peer-reviewed articles or peer-reviewed. Are they articles? Is that what you would call?
Yeah, a journal article or a paper.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, a journal paper of some kind as a source for his for his blog posts, which are anywhere between like, I don't know, 600 words or 2,000, somewhere is in there. But yeah, so validation seeking goals. I think this was how I, for a long time, approached fitness, which is why I think it was not, it didn't stick very well.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah,
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. It's really easy in our culture to find value in looking a certain way, especially when you're in like, high school and college and you want to fit in and, I don't know. At least it was for me. I don't know. Maybe that's not the truth for everybody.
Well, that's really interesting that just talking about this quote with physical fitness in mind.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I have generally approached it from the standpoint of what can I learn about my body as I'm moving this weight, moving myself? How can this help me become better in other areas of my life, as opposed to I want to have this
physique,
certain status.
Sure.
Or there's definitely a component of that, but it's the more primary driving force is that desire to see what the body God has given me can do.
Yeah, well,
see what it can be ready for.
God has gifted different people differently. Do you remember when I did jiu-jitsu with you?
Yeah.
Do you remember, was it so obvious how self-conscious I was the entire time? Or no, not particularly?
Probably not as obvious as you thought it was.
Huh, that's interesting. Because I just remember like, you would say, here, contort yourself this way, or move like this, or flex, squeeze this and flex that, and then you'll just do it. And I was just like, I felt like I was typing. I felt like I was riding a bicycle where you had to pedal the opposite way. I just felt so out of my element.
But that is everyone's experience with jiu-jitsu. Well, maybe not everyone's, but...
Was it yours, Kyle?
It was definitely mine.
Okay.
There was a lot of just kind of, I don't understand what we're doing, and I caught about 2 words of the 10 things that you said we were going to do, in what you said was a very simple drill, but I'm just going to hold on to those 2 words and writhe around on the ground until someone submits me and I do those 2 words over again.
There's also a lot of sweating. I remember that. It was a very sweaty time.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's actually, I don't know if you meant that to be encouraging, but maybe I'll try again. I don't know when I'll have time. Maybe this fall once. It's something I've been thinking about. It's like I was writing a note to my wife, and I had said something about after COVID, and I was like, oh wait, I have no idea like when that's gonna be.
2022.
Is that what they're saying?
When they have a vaccine fully vetted.
Yeah. I heard somebody talk. It was the pastor of Northwest Gospel. They have a podcast, right? And I listen to that every now and again. And one of them made a joke that he had seen on Facebook, which is like, man, it seems like the anti-vaxxers are awfully quiet. And somebody was like, that's because they're dead. And I was just like, I wonder how that made it through their filter. I was a little bit like, I actually spent a little bit of time thinking about it. You know what? Do you know who's an anti-vaxxer for COVID? Everybody. Nobody has a vaccine. Like,
no, that's not being an anti-vaxxer for COVID. That's just being a non-vaxxer.
But it's the same. It's yeah. Well, but everybody's in the same boat. I said vote. Same boat. Hey, you still live in Washington?
Yep.
Have you seen the primary ballot?
There are so many people for governor.
There are so many people for governor. It's like 25 or something. Have you looked at the party affiliates?
I was very disturbed when I looked at the party affiliates.
You didn't like the Socialist Communist Party or Socialist Worker Party?
No, actually, I mean, those are always there. The ones that disturbed me were the pre-2016 GOP party or Trump Republican Party.
Yeah, you didn't like those? Why not?
I think mostly I didn't like the Trump Republican Party because it just exemplified how far people have gone down the road in putting this narcissist on a pedestal.
Uh-oh. You're throwing shade, Kyle.
I'm throwing facts.
Okay, sure. Have you heard of the 13th?
Friday the 13th?
No, the documentary, the 13th. It's about the 13th Amendment.
No, I have not heard about that documentary.
I didn't know this, but I'm curious if you do, because you're always smarter than I. I just think that you won't know this fact. But do you know what the 13th Amendment is?
Nope.
See, okay. Well, now you've surprised me because I put you on this pedestal. Now, it's the abolition of slavery.
Okay.
And so it's interesting in that there is a caveat. There's a caveat to, like, slavery is legal within a specific loophole in the system, and that is for felons. You are legally allowed to have to not be paid for your labor.
Yep.
Do you think that's right? We don't have to talk about this.
This is a really long topic potentially, because I think you have to bring the death penalty into this. And capital punishment, because we have our definition of what a felon is, and a felon spans such a
gap,
broad range of
I'm talking specifically about corporations being able to use free labor by felons. So do you think that the death penalty still has to be brought in? If I'm curious about that specific issue.
Right. And I think it all has to do with how do we treat people who have transgressed the law in heinous ways? Do we as a society believe that there are things that are so heinous that we need to make a statement about what we as a society think about someone doing those things? Or
there are lots of things that you can become a felon for that are not. I wouldn't consider heinous.
And right. And that's why I was saying it's such a wide thing. There are certain things that I would say shouldn't be a felony, and so it wouldn't make sense for that sort of extreme punishment of essentially enslavement for your time in prison. I don't think that is correct, but I think there are other things where it gets closer to the other end of the spectrum. And
under what circumstances do you think a private corporation should be able to profit from any living person's enslavement? You see a scenario where that's acceptable?
The scenario you just described?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
So the scenario where someone has, because it's not interminable necessarily. So it's
when you say
a set
interminable,
period of time.
No.
It's not going until the person is dead.
A lot of times it is. In California it is.
And that's where the death penalty comes in.
So, okay. So I actually don't I think that the death penalty is somewhat removed from this conversation, in that I don't think that, and I'm not saying that Apple does this. I mean, I don't know whether they do or not, but I don't think that any private corporation should be able to profit from from free labor. I think that's ridiculous.
Do you think it's fair to say that someone who commits
let's
a crime that we would agree is a felony has a debt to society?
Yeah, let's say murder and rape, of a child. Go as far as you want.
And I think that needs to be dealt with swiftly with capital punishment.
Absolutely. Sure.
Not with slavery.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any scenario where I'm like, yeah, it's okay. White, black, Mexican, Asian, all of the races. It has nothing to do with race at that point, which is what the 13th is about. The 13th is about how, now we get into it later, maybe probably a different time or maybe never, but it puts incentives in such a weird place to have slave labor legal. If somebody had told me a month ago and hadn't taken the time to explain that there was still slave labor going on and that corporations were directly benefiting from that labor,
it's not just corporations that are benefiting from that.
Yeah, no. But I think it's especially egregious that corporations are. I think that the government shouldn't. But
you and I benefit from it like the corporations do.
How so?
We're able to buy products at a lower price.
I thought all my stuff was made in China.
What do you think the labor is like over there?
Kyle, you and your thoughtfulness.
I mean, there the people are essentially in slavery, whether they're free walking down the street or in prison.
That's true.
Because of the system of government that they have over there, you are not a free person. If your neighbor doesn't like you, they can come up with something that puts you in an indoctrination camp. I mean, this has been very well documented with the Uyghurs, the Muslim Chinese in Western China, where if you are viewed as being too observant, and these are things like you go and pray too many times a day, or you have a beard that's too long, you get rounded up and taken to an indoctrination camp, and you're not allowed to leave until you can be a good Maoist Chinese citizen.
I feel like you've deflected somewhat.
Okay. So going back to whether corporations should be able to use slave labor at all, I would be,
and I'm gonna be as specific. I would be as specific as in America.
In America, yes.
Because I can't.
So I'm sticking with America.
Okay, sure.
Here, so going back to America, where we have the 13th Amendment, if someone has committed grand larceny, which is a felony,
okay,
and they're put in prison for, say, 3 years. I mean, this is probably way less than someone would actually be put in prison for. But let's say we had reasonable prison sentences, which is another part of this discussion. Mm-hmm. If for part of that time they were essentially in return for the free room, board, and health care that they get during their time in prison, they are loaned out by the government to a corporation to do manufacturing for a U.S. company while they are repaying, quote unquote, their debt to society. And then they get out. And this is another broken thing. When they get out, there needs to be good opportunity for them to actually reintegrate into society so they don't have a black mark on their name that prevents them from getting hired and pushes them into poverty and back towards that life of crime.
Or being able to rent, or being able to...
Exactly. And so these are all wrapped up in this question. I think what you're rightly pointing out is we have a system set up right now which puts people away, throws away the key, and then someone is, in essence, a slave for the rest of their life. And I don't think that is right.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say a limited form of that is wrong, given what someone may have or has been convicted of doing.
Yeah, and I guess I would just like to see some pretty significant accountability. Yeah. Right.
Because you brought up a really good point with there are some really weird incentives here where corporations with big budgets to lobby can profit from people being sent to prison for a long time and having the key thrown away. And that is something that we do need to look at, and ideally with constructive bipartisan legislation deal with.
Now you're just like, you're talking rainbows and unicorns, man.
Or are we talking
ideally is what we're talking.
I was gonna say, are we talking about a society where the gospel is having an impact?
Ooh, yeah, we may very well be. I liked that conversation. That was, I think, helpful. I'm not quite sure. That's something I've noticed. I say a lot. I'm not quite sure how we got there. I don't remember the exact path. I don't know that it's helpful to point that out or not point it out.
You wanted to know if I knew that the 13th Amendment was about the abolition of slavery in order to get more support for the Civil War on the side of the North, because it was after the Union armies had been sort of destroyed at like Fredericksburg and such.
Yeah, you got it. Can you see whether I smile or not on the FaceTime, or am I too far away?
Well, your face is kind of behind your pop filter. It's almost like you're wearing a mask. I had a fascinating conversation with someone last night about a mask.
Yeah.
About masks. I'm curious, what is your reaction when you see people wearing masks? How do you feel?
Generally, I see it as a positive thing, in that I guess I've just kind of internalized that you're protecting me and I'm going to wear mine so that I protect you.
Okay, so it does make you feel good.
Yes. And so there were signs everywhere at church, my church this weekend: must wear a mask inside, blah, 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 unless you have a health condition. And there was an entire family of normal, healthy people, and none of them wore masks, and everybody else in the church wore. And
Okay.
There's like two.
Did you judge them?
There was two parts of it that were frustrating to me. One was that our church is streamed on YouTube, and I don't think that family could make the argument that they had health reasons for why they weren't wearing masks. And so we could get shut down and not be able to meet anymore. I don't know that that's likely to happen, but they were in pretty clear view of the camera for most of the service. And then two,
wait, are people required to wear masks?
In church service? Yes. Inside, if you aren't in church services, it says specifically.
Oh, Inslee put that in?
I think so, yeah. I'm not 100% sure.
Because I don't think it's required in Oregon. It's not required in Idaho.
To wear masks inside in a church service?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, Inslee isn't Brown or who's the governor of Idaho?
Oh, I can't remember his name. It was Butch Otter for a long time. It's Brad Little now.
Okay. Yeah.
He was pretty funny. He had a statement where, so he got up and gave his address saying masks are required, and if you don't wear a mask, it'll be a misdemeanor. And then someone in the media asked him, so how is this going to be enforced? And he said, I don't know. I don't really care. I guess it'll be up to you and the media to enforce it. And then just kind of walked off the stage.
That's funny. I mean, Jay Inslee has basically said we're not enforcing this.
Right.
He said he made a strong statement about how he believes the Washingtonians will, do what's right.
So why are you concerned about the church getting shut down if it's not going to be enforced?
Things are changing so fast, man. I mean, first of all, I don't believe that he's not going to enforce it. Why would I trust that?
I don't know.
Yeah, no. I mean, so that's one piece. And the other is I guess just generally I see it as especially in like the city parts, like more urban areas where people are packed closer in, I see it as I don't know, like a lot of people are dying. I know a handful of people, through, I don't know, third connections who've gotten sick or died. And I don't think that this is a hoax, I guess. I don't think that I'm concerned that if people don't take it very seriously, that this could turn into another flu where it comes back every year and it's a little bit of a different iteration.
It'll do that whether or not. It is another flu at this point.
Well, then that sucks because the flu kills between 50 and 70,000 people every year.
Yep.
And so let's say COVID kills between 50 and 70,000 people every year. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. This year it's more like 150 at this point. Let's say we get it down to, flu levels. It's like, well, then we have two things killing 50 to 70,000 people every year. Like, that doesn't seem great. And what if we have a COVID-21?
It's very likely that we will have more COVIDs in the future. So it is interesting you bring up the flu. The person I was talking to, his grandma was actually a COVID death, but she was a COVID death because she got the flu, and the doctor told her not to come in and get treatment because COVID was going on.
Well, that sucks too.
But so yeah, stuff like that has been going on, and it's sad. One of the interesting quotes that was related to me the other night was Nassim Taleb, the author of The Black Swan and Fooled by Randomness, was quoted saying, let's say, about masks, saying, let's say you had some disease and someone put a glass with a beverage in front of you and said there's a 1% chance that this beverage will cure your disease. There's a 99% chance that it will do nothing. Would you drink it? So basically what he was saying is that's what wearing a mask is. You've got a 1% chance that it'll actually do anything, that there isn't a lot of evidence that it actually will, but there's a chance it might. There's a 99% chance that it won't do anything. But since it might do something, let's go ahead and wear the mask.
That seems like a unhelpful way to think about it.
Why does it seem unhelpful? Because that is what the data looks like.
What data?
Regarding masks. The data regarding the effectiveness of masks preventing the transmission of...
It doesn't need to prevent it. It needs to reduce it below 1, right? Or is that what you're talking about?
Okay. Sorry. The data on masks significantly reducing the transmission of COVID. Of cloth masks.
Oh.
If everyone was wearing an N95 mask, that would change. That was properly fitted and all that.
Yeah, those are two big what ifs. What do you... Because I basically have just heard straight the opposite. So I'm very curious to see an article that you can put in our show notes that says something to that effect.
Okay. So...
But you yeah, go on.
So the articles I've read are during the MERS, essentially the camel flu. It is MERS CoV-2.
The Middle East. Yeah.
Doctors in Asia were looking at whether it was important for the doctors to wear a mask while they're treating the patient. Mm-hmm. So this is seeing whether a mask would help prevent exposure to MERS while they were working on the patient. And what they found is that there was no conclusive evidence either way that the mask did anything.
So that's somewhat of a different...
Right.
Would you say it's similar enough?
Well, it's different because it's looking at, does the mask protect you as opposed to does the mask protect others?
Yeah, well, there's two ways that it's different then, because if you had the patients wear it, then you would have a closer analogy to where we're basically... I don't see my mask as protecting me.
Right. And so then you go to the papers about...
But MERS is a completely different disease, yeah? Or no?
It's a coronavirus.
I understand that. It's a different coronavirus, though. This isn't,
Well, but...
Would you say that analogous enough?
Let's think about just think intuitively about how it gets transmitted. Basically what you have happening is you have the virus being spread through the air. Mm-hmm. And so the size of the virus is going to be roughly the same, whether it's MERS CoV-2 or COVID-19. And so it stands to reason that a mask would have a similar impact.
Okay.
And then there was another study that was looking at the evolution of using masks for surgery. So this is where you're trying to prevent the doctor from causing an infection in the patient. And interestingly, the conclusion from that article was that in a medical environment, the data doesn't actually strongly support doctors wearing masks in the OR at this point. Like it's basically viewed as it can't hurt, so we'll just keep doing it. But we don't have data that indicates if they took them off, you'd have a swath of patients getting major post-op infections. So that's where I think Nassim Taleb's analogy does stand.
Oh, fair enough.
But I'm curious, have you read papers that indicate that there's a...
No, news articles.
Okay.
The finest of all sources.
Yeah.
You didn't even know how to respond to that one, did you?
Not, yeah.
Normally we end at a lighter note, but my time is running out.
Well, okay. Well, this isn't really a lighter note, but then what the person I was talking to said is we don't know what the potential psychological ramifications may be. Like, even leaving aside the fact that people who are forced to wear masks all day have lower O2 levels at the end of the day, and what that may do to people's with compromised cardiovascular systems. We don't know what the psychological implications are of not seeing a significant part of people's faces for upwards of 2 years.
Or even being forced to do something that you think is stupid.
Or that.
Like there's a psychological impact to, or there potentially is, a psychological
Right.
impact to doing something that you are, yeah, that you just disagree with.
But his point was that we haven't, so we have these studies showing that masks may help, may not help with the spread of COVID, but we have no one's asking the question of what might be the bad impacts of wearing masks. So you look at Talib's analogy and you have, yes, there's a 1% chance that it'll do something good, but what's the percent chance that it could do something harmful to a significant portion of the population?
Well, I think that the 1%, 99% is probably somewhat, I think he probably just pulled that.
Oh, it's definitely tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're going to ask about 1%, you then can't use the 1% as a number. You have to, yeah. So what would be the...
Right. But the point is neither number's been tested.
Sure.
Well, actually, I take that back. The mass transmission number has been tested and found to be inconclusive, but no one's even asking the question about the other number.
So is, when you say inconclusive, that's a lower p-value than 0.5 or 5 or whatever?
I mean, it depends on your significance, but I think it's normally 0.05, right?
Oh, yeah.
A p of less than 0.5 is garbage. But you could talk to your wife about that.
My wife knows.
We had a fascinating discussion about that one time, which I didn't get nearly as much information out of as I would have liked to because of a lack of time. But
are you talking about a conversation? Was that when you and your wife and me and my wife were talking about? Was that right before you left?
No, that was actually at the big Bible study house near the kitchen.
You could have just said at a Bible study. I think that would have been fine.
Okay.
Probably enough information. Speaking of that, I looked pretty closely at Comrade Inslee's rules regarding religious groups.
Emperor, please.
What'd you just say?
Emperor Inslee, please. For everyone who's listening, Daniel and I are on FaceTime so that we can see each other's reactions, but we aren't recording this.
Well, I'm gonna cut this. This is this is not golden, scintillating. Oh no, I'm not gonna use that word. We've done better than this.